What's up and welcome back to Cryptographics. Today we're going to have a bit of a long one. We're going over the ultimate hex staking guide. Prepare yourselves for a whole lot of information. Take it slow. Hopefully have titles and all sorts of divided up segments to this whole episode. So go back and rewatch it, but it's going to be a bit of a longer one. So let's go. When it comes to staking hex, there are so many possibilities for how to do it. There are staking ladders, snowball ladders, max length stakes, staking your hex for one set period, and everything and anything in between. To make matters more complicated, we have Pulse Chain launching soon, which will duplicate our hex whether it is staked or unstaked. Now, many questions I've received around staking sound like this. Should I stake my hex now or after the fork? Should I stake on both Ethereum and Pulse Chain or just one chain? The problem with these questions is that I cannot answer them for you. What I can do is lay out as many arguments as possible for the different scenarios. Let's start with the easy questions and move forward from there. So let's start with, what is a staking ladder? A staking ladder is a series of stakes that end year after year and require you to divide up your total hex by the number of stakes you wish to have in your ladder. You can stake evenly across the years you are staked for, or you can divide your hex up however you wish. The point of this ladder is to provide a potentially increasing amount of income year after year for a given number of years. For example, if I have 50,000 hex and want to do a 5-year staking ladder, evenly distributed across 5 years, of course, I would simply create 5 different stakes, starting from 1 year and ending at the 5-year mark. It's really that simple. So you'd have stakes from 1 to 2, 3, 4, and 5-year stakes. You have 5 stakes total throughout that entire period. You do not have to do this starting at 1 to 5 years, of course. You can start your ladder at any point in the future and do any number of consecutive yearly stakes afterwards. You can do like 5 to 7, you can do 7 to 11, 5 all the way to 15, and so on. Then once your stake is finished, or your first stake is finished, you can then turn your staking ladders into snowball ladders. The only difference between a staking ladder and a snowball ladder is this. Once your hex has ended, or your hex stake has ended, instead of selling or keeping that hex liquid, you restake whatever amount of hex from that stake you choose for 1 year after your last stake ends, thus continuing your ladder indefinitely and making your hex portfolio consistently grow with a constant yearly stake coming out. You can restake as much or as little of the ended stake as you like, but the point here is to continuously having stakes end year after year and have yearly income potentially. Hence the snowball. It's constantly snowballing into the longer or a year after your longest end stake. Now we come to single length stakes, meaning you take the entirety of your hex and stake it for a given period. There are many arguments as to why you may or may not want to stake any given length, but let's start with the shorter stakes. So for this, we're going to start by qualifying short stakes as 1 to 5 years. We're only going to consider that because 1 to 5 is shorter due to the APY per stake, and as well as just keeping the math simple by dividing the 15 years into just 3 parts, as hex can be staked from 1 day to 5,555 days or 15.2 years. So why would you want to have shorter stakes? Well, the obvious reasons are lack of trust in hex being around or crypto being around after that period, lack of trust in the investment itself, life circumstances, lack of knowledge as to the difference in payout between longer and shorter stakes, or wanting to benefit from stakes in a shorter time horizon. By having shorter stakes, you're hedging your bets on the short-term price appreciation being the major catalyst for most of your profits in hex. Of course, between 10 to 30% APY will increase your gains, but most of your profits will need to come from price appreciation. By staking shorter, you're also giving up your current T-share rate much sooner and will have to stake much more hex to get the same payout that you were getting during that stake. When you stake, you get paid based on the T-share price at the time of staking for the entirety of the stake. So if you staked longer when the T-share price was 20,000 hex and the T-share price in the future is 1,000,000 hex while you are still staked, you will still be getting paid the daily payout per T-share you're credited for having. This means while it costs new stakers 1,000,000 hex to get the daily payout, it only costs you 20,000 hex per share. Once you've staked, you hold whatever amount of the T-shares you have for the entirety of the stake regardless of the T-share price. When you have 1 share or 1 T-share, you maintain that share for the life of the stake. Here's why you would want to do a medium length stake. You have a longer time horizon, but not up to 10 to 15 years. You want a longer term staking ladder starting point. APY is climbing higher, and the likely payout will likely result in substantially higher gains. You are not concerned about delaying gratification long term. You have a secure way to hold your funds over the long term, and you believe you will have access to your crypto long term as well. By staking in this period, you are making a prediction that Hex will not only survive long term, but will either pay a substantial amount more long term than short term, as well as that price will be at least what it is currently by the time your stake ends. This period of staking is when APY is nearing the maximum possible amount currently. If waiting 9 years for a potentially massive payout is worth it to you, this may be your staking period. This could also be a great place to start a longer term staking ladder, so you are both delaying gratification and getting very close to maximizing APY. So why wouldn't you want to do a medium length stake then? The time horizon's too long for you. You only have a hot wallet, either MetaMask or Trust or something like that, or any wallet, basically any online extension wallet, and you do not have a cold wallet, which is a hardware wallet, nor are you willing to learn or invest in one in order to protect your security. You do not trust that Hex will increase in value long term, or do not think it will. Maybe you don't quite understand that the potential for very high rewards is possible in this period of staking beyond what shorter stakes can yield. You do not trust in Hex enough to commit to that period, and you prefer either shorter or longer, so that's closer to the max length stakes, maybe, just because of your own time horizons or your own willingness to delay gratification or lack of willingness to. So now let's look at longer term staking, which is 10 to 15.2 years, the maximum length essentially, which is also the maximum bonus. Longer term stakes do sound the most frightening, as they are more than a decade away. However, the likelihood for incredible amounts of yield over this period are at its peak. As T-shares become more scarce due to the cost increasing over time, there will be the highest payouts over time for those who are staked the longest. We can't predict what the payout per day will be, but we can predict it will be substantially bigger than what it is today. At this level of staking, you are also getting the maximum bonus for what the system calculates towards your effective Hex, which is a bonus that the system gives you for staking based on the length of a stake. The bonus is not what will be paid to you, but instead is the Hex that is counted towards the amount of T-shares that the system will lock you in as having staked and pay you for. At the 10-year mark and up, if you staked 50,000 Hex, and this could be any number, I'm using 50,000 Hex just to show you how the bonus works here. If you staked 50,000 Hex, the system will lock in the amount of T-shares that you'll be credited for as if you staked 150,000 Hex for that period. Longer than 10-year stakes gives you a 200% bonus with your effective Hex. So if you had 10,000, you'd get credited for 30,000, 100,000, you get credited for 300,000, and so on. So why would you want to stake though for 10 plus years? You're willing to wait more than a decade for delayed gratification, knowing just how much potential there truly is. You have alternative income, and you are not reliant on the stake being a saving grace financially. You understand that while there is risk in locking up anything in the crypto sphere for 15 years due to several reasons, the rewards greatly outweigh the risk. You have a plan and security configuration that will allow you to safely store your Hex and all seed phrases and passcodes for 10 plus years. You think that not only Hex's price will continue to increase on average, but the payout over that time frame will compound the increase in price in potentially unfathomable ways. So let's take a look at now why you wouldn't want to stake for 10 plus years. Your time horizon, or even maybe your lifespan, just doesn't align with the stakes of that length. You consider 10 plus years just far too risky. You do not have a security plan, nor are you willing to learn or do the research to learn. You do not think that Hex will increase much at all in price long term and will likely increase more in the short term instead. You do not think that the long-term rewards outweigh the risks. So let's now take a look at the minimum time required before ending a stake, because it's not what you think. When you're staking for a given period, you are making a promise to the Hex Smart Contract, and in return, the Hex Smart Contract makes a few promises back. If you make a 5-year stake, you are making the promise to lock up your principal Hex for half of that time. If you hold beyond that promise, you will earn some portion of the yield generated over that time. This applies to any stake length, whether it's a year, 10, 15, etc. The Hex Smart Contract makes 3 promises. The first promise is that if you hold for half of the stake length, your principal will not be penalized for ending the stake. The second promise is that if you make it to the end of the stake or any time after the halfway point, you will be rewarded with yield on top of your principal. And obviously this is scaled. So if you go all the way to the end of your stake, you will get all of the yield. If you go 10 days after the halfway point, you'll only get a little bit of the yield. The third promise, though, is for the case that you have ended your stake somewhere in between the halfway point and the end of your stake without completing it. In this case, the promise is to pay your yield you would have earned for completing the entirety of the stake to those who are still staked, as well as the origin address. And I'm not going to get into the origin address in this video. If you break the first promise, you may lose a significant portion and possibly all of your principal. This depends on how soon after starting a stake that you emergency end stake. You click the little red button and you end your stake. While there are infinite factors as to why you may or may not want to use a specific staking strategy, use this as a starting point to guide your logic to what makes the most sense for you. No two people will have the same reasons for staking the same length, nor should you feel pressured to stake for any given length. Even if mathematically a longer stake makes way more sense or the most sense, for some, it may still be far too much time committed to something that lives in the most volatile asset class in the world, and it just doesn't make sense to them. Now we come to the most difficult part of all. Should you stake before or after the Pulse Chain fork, and should you stake on both chains or just one? As a caveat to this logic, we are making the assumption here that you are planning on staking no matter what and holding Hex long-term in staking form. However, you're unsure of what makes the most sense for you. Let's look at pre-Pulse Chain. Let's try and weigh this out as objectively as we can here, and first look at why you'd want to stake now instead of or after the fork. We do not know when Pulse Chain will launch. It could launch within the next few weeks, or it could possibly take many more months up to a year. We don't know. Because of this, if you're staked, you're going to be continuously earning yield the entire time. By staking now, you will not only be earning yield before the fork, but you will likely earn even more rewards due to users' emergency end staking to migrate over to Pulse Chain. We don't know the scale at which that migration will occur, but it probably will to some degree. It could be a small and a very insignificant amount, but it could be a larger portion than we expect. We'll have to wait and see. All yield that you've earned prior to the fork will get copied over with the copied Hex stakes you will get on the Pulse Chain. So if you've earned 10,000 Hex in yield so far, that yield will get copied over to the Pulse Chain with the exact same amount of days left and served in the stake. If you believe that Ethereum will survive long term, and you'll be able to access and end your stakes at whatever length you choose, everything that I just previously said prior to believing about in Ethereum also applies to this logic here. Finally, if you want to have an equal amount of Hex on both Ethereum and Pulse Chain and are not interested in migrating to Pulse Chain solely, then staking sooner may be best for you. Now let's look at the post Pulse Chain fork option. The most pressing reason as to why you may want to wait until after the Pulse Chain fork to stake is to migrate funds over to the Pulse Chain network. If you wish to only have Hex on the new network, then waiting for the Pulse Chain may be the best bet for you. But personally, I haven't been able to think of very many reasons as to why you would want to wait until after the fork, unless you were thinking of doing something like that, given the context of you are going to stake, period, and you just don't know when you should do it. Let's look at some of the drawbacks, though. By staking pre-fork or on Ethereum in general, you're likely to pay more gas fees with an increasing amount due from longer or max length stakes. Fortunately, there is a workaround for this, though. Because you are getting a free copy of this stake on Pulse Chain, and the gas fees are likely to be substantially lower to end the stake, you have the option to use some of the profits from the stake to pay off the gas fees due on Ethereum. By using this strategy, you will not pay anything out of pocket and will still likely have the majority of your profits from the free copy on Pulse Chain plus the profits from your Ethereum stake. By staking post-fork, you are betting on Pulse Chain and Pulse Chain Hex being a much less risky investment nest over the long term. Again, the main drawbacks to this are having to forfeit the opportunity to earn yield in the short term before the fork, as well as the increased payout when users EES or emergency end stake to migrate over to the Pulse Chain. Again, this is not the be-all end-all. However, it should serve as a guide for logical starting points when assessing what to do with your Hex. There are no right or wrong ways to stake, but there is a right way for you. So thank you so much for watching. If you've made it to the end, amazing. I appreciate you watching the whole video. Please smash the like and subscribe button and drop me a comment if I've missed something else I should add to this list, or if you just love the video. If you'd like to support the channel, you can go to cryptographics.com and either buy some merch, book a one-on-one call, you can donate, or join the YouTube membership. And finally, there are scammers in the comments. If it doesn't say my highlighted Cryptographics little name bar, it's not me messaging you. And don't go to WhatsApp or any other place other than cryptographics.com to contact me directly if you have actual questions. So thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you very soon in the next one. Peace.